Hey, what's up YouTube? I'm Drew Breeze and this is the No Hairline vlog. I'm back to talk about ADOS, but before I do that and get into these facts, I want you to hit that subscribe button, subscribe to Main Point Media. We're going to be dropping a lot of new content that is all parts of the black lifestyle, unified black expression, all parts of black life, because that's what we represent here. Anyway, let me get into this because ADOS is in my comments, and the people who are down with this nativist, tribalist, separatist movement that has been mainly founded and advanced by Yvette Carnell. I need to address some myths about black history. I need to address some facts about how black people have always worked together, and I need to break down how Yvette Carnell and others like her, including Antonio Moore, are in it for a grift. They are a scam who are trying to personally advance themselves at the expense of black struggle, which is not a new thing. Black struggle has always been interfered with by agents of division. So in my last video, I talked about how she's essentially the feds. And I use feds in a way that's colloquial to say that people who interfere with black struggle for freedom and for labor rights and for fair compensation, those people are acting on behalf of a white supremacist agenda. Even if they are not puppets of white supremacist organizations, even if they are not getting directly paid by white supremacist organizations, they are serving the agenda of white supremacists. And that's what Yvette Carnell and many of the ADOS movement leaders are doing online, especially to the tune of their own following, building their own following, and mainly erasing history. Because there's a long history of black people working together, whether you call it Pan-Africanism or internationalism. There's a long history, especially in the labor rights movement of the 1960s, 1940s, especially in the communist and Marxist movements throughout the 20th century. Black people have worked together, and that's the way I want to start this video, is by admitting, like I did in the last video. All right, I'm gonna take y'all back. So when I was in high school, I used to be in a school where I had multiple friends from all different backgrounds, and one of my friends is Nigerian, another one of my friends is Jamaican, another is from Mauritius, it's an island off the coast of Madagascar in Africa, and another friend is Black American. And we would sit at the lunch table and do the dozens. We would be straight roasting each other. Like when my Nigerian friend would jump in, we'd be like, oh, that's why your country's in turmoil. That's why your country has civil wars. And then he'd jump back at me and my Jamaican friend and be like, oh, okay, that's why y'all all smoke ganja and make reggae music and climb coconut trees. Like, yo, find me a coconut man. So he would go at us. And then when my friend who's Black American would jump in, we'd be like, you have no culture. You have no culture. You don't even know what your parents are. You don't know what your grandparents are. And so we would engage in that round roasting of each other across the African diaspora because we were young and stupid. And I want to apologize for how much that kind of divisive talk gets through in our black struggle as people, where we're comparing cultures and it's not playful. You know, we're putting each other down. And I know that from my part of the diaspora that's happened, like Caribbean Americans and Caribbean immigrants have looked down on African American culture just as much as we've contributed to it. And that's part of the problem, is that there's this fissure, there's a division between us that doesn't need to be there, but that happens because colonialism and capitalism and racism work together to keep us divided and to keep us fighting for the same false sense of scarcity, false sense of scarce resources. But that is false. There's an abundance of resources for everyone, and Yvette Carnell and others are playing to a scarcity mindset that only serves them and serves a racist capitalist agenda. So I want to get into some facts about why I decided to talk about the ADOS movement and specifically how I discovered so much about Black history by looking up how ADOS is working and erasing Black history, but also how many times Black people have worked together to pull each other up and to struggle against the same colonialist forces. Many federal and state organizations have tracked Black resistance movements throughout time, and the Black Panthers were no exception, especially when the Black Panthers were promoting an idea of Black power that did have a class analysis, that did say poor people, we're being held down because we are poor, and race is a multiplying factor in how we're tracked and how we're treated and how we're mistreated eventually. And so ADOS is one of many movements that's tried to represent Black people in America. But I think the main problem with how ADOS works is that it mimics how the FBI, CIA, and other federal agencies have divided groups of Black power thought and made them enemies of each other when they could be fighting against the state. And Yvette Carnell and her links to those forces are clear, even in ideology, if not in finance. So specifically, Yvette Carnell started a room on Clubhouse talking about the Fred Hampton biopic and how Daniel Kaluuya shouldn't be in that lead role, or she was part of a group of people who were saying that a Black British person shouldn't be in that lead role. And I find that to be the first false premise slash distortion tactic that Carnell and ADOS movement leaders use right now, which is that a fake representation argument takes over their social media content. So I want to repeat that. There's a fake representation debate. There's a fake representation debate on all of their social media content where they're talking about movies and what actors should play, what Black roles. And I do agree that there's an American folklore and history that we have to respect and honor. But Universal Studios ain't cutting no check for reparations. So if ADOS is focused on reparations and how reparations should be distributed, the focus on a movie industry that has never been Black run or Black owned, and a filmmaker in Shaka King who's a Black American and a Black nationalist seems misplaced and seems like another division tactic and one to draw attention rather than to advance the agenda of reparations for American descendants of slavery. And I just want to say, I believe American descendants of slavery or Black people in America, because I don't think slavery defines Black people in America. I think it needs to be reckoned with, but I don't think slavery defines generations of Black people. That is a grievance that has to be repaid by America, and America has to reckon with it, just like I have to reckon with any times I haven't helped in that struggle. And I'm trying my best to help in the struggle in this video to make sure that y'all know we've worked together in many, many cases. Caribbean, African, and American people from all across the diaspora have worked together. Black-skinned people have worked together. And ADOS, as it's known right now, is a nativist separatist movement that's fueled by division, fear, and hatred. It's like any other fringe group that plays to loss aversion, plays to a very recent history of political mishaps and misstatements, and a fake representation debate. And the reason why that representation debate is so harmful is that specifically Black people who are immigrants to the United States are not marked in some way to show that they are immigrants. We can be killed by police and the racist state just like Black Americans can be. And the racist state acts on our bodies in the same way that it acts on Black Americans' bodies. And I'm gonna get into that in a second. So let's break down for a minute why Yvette Carnell may want to participate in a nativist anti-immigrant movement in order to advance her own agenda. Because we see that the fake representation debate is the way that she gets on social media and floods the feed and draws attention to the ADOS movement. Okay, if we really want to break down how and why Yvette Carnell became popular, we have to start in 2016. So in 2016, when Donald Trump was running for the presidency, what he discovered with his campaign strategist is that he could make hay online. He could make a really huge impression on these fringe groups who were starting to form online that specifically were fighting over identity. Identity is one of the biggest dividers in American history because we are run on racism. We are run on bias and white supremacy and the notion that white people in this country somehow deserve more just by virtue of being white. It started in the 1600s in Jamestown, Virginia, and it's continued all the way to today. And when Donald Trump noticed that, what he did was work with Russian operatives to create campaigns, fake accounts, and specific messages to divide groups of people. Yvette Carnell was forming her YouTube channel, Breaking Brown, around that time. And she, like many people, realized that division was going to sell big on social media. And so that's what she promotes, is division. And her claims about American descendants of slavery and using ADOS as a cornerstone of her political action is just a way to capitalize off of division. But that division is actually something that Black freedom struggles have been fighting for a very long time. And it's also a division that the state and white supremacists and colonial powers have been using to keep Black freedom movements stagnant. And Yvette Carnell may not be, again, paid by the state, but she's on the board of an organization called Progressives for Immigration Reform. Now, Progressives for Immigration Reform is a really interesting org to be linked to, mainly because it was founded by a man named John Tanton. John Tanton is a known white nationalist and a eugenicist who wanted Black and brown people to stop procreating and also wanted to cease immigration to this country and to keep the nation as white as possible. John Tanton also cozied up to a woman named Cordelia Scaife May, who's a 100-millionaire heiress who funded throughout her life many anti-immigration organizations, including Progressives for Immigration Reform, where Yvette Carnell was an admitted board member. Progressives for Immigration Reform and the Federation for American Immigration Reform are both organizations in the Tanton network of white nationalists, white supremacist, divisive groups. Why is Yvette Carnell on the board of an organization like that? Cordelia Scaife May, who funded these organizations, and John Tanton have been famously racist, have been famously bigoted against Black people specifically. They've said in letters, and this is something you can look up in the New York Times. They did a great profile of Cordelia Scaife May. They did a good profile of John Tanton. In letters across the years, John Tanton and Cordelia Scaife May, people who funded and founded the organization that Yvette Carnell is a part of, were openly racist and wanted Black people not to procreate and reproduce. What does that have to do with reparations? What does that have to do with an identity movement keeping people relevant and giving them the rights and compensation they deserve? Again, like I've said, I believe that any Black American whose family was here for generations, adding to the wealth of this nation under racist auspices, deserves compensation. The way to go about compensation is up for debate, but I do not see the point of creating divisive nativist movements like ADOS and riling up people's anger and fear about immigrants when immigrants aren't the ones who have been absorbing the wealth or the people who can pay Black American descendants of slavery. They aren't the ones who created that wealth gap or that system that's racist. So Yvette Carnell is capitalizing off of a divisive movement that social media, in specific places like YouTube, places like Facebook and Twitter, are great at bubbling up, at inflating past their size or even their rational connection to history. So Yvette Carnell's motives need to be examined very closely, and the same with Antonio Moore. Antonio Moore and Yvette Carnell are also defectors from the left. What they do is they've criticized the American political left, which is worthy of critique. The American political left is worthy of critique, but their critique and their content, Yvette Carnell's Breaking Brown channel and Antonio Moore's Tone Talks channel, is almost exclusively aimed at the left. Why? If racism has been propagated by the entire political system, why is the critique that Yvette Carnell has so squarely aimed at people like Joy-Ann Reid or Kamala Harris, and specifically about Kamala Harris's parentage, that she's of Indian and Jamaican descent, even though she grew up here in the United States and was an American by all measures before ADOS and Yvette Carnell brought up her parentage. And I think it's because these nativist movements, these separatist movements, are as American as apple pie. The Irish and Italians were ghettoized, Jews in America were ghettoized, but it's another way of propagating and propping up racism is to have an anti-immigration stance. And Yvette Carnell starts with pop culture topics like what black people from the diaspora should be able to play which roles, and she rolls that into all this content about who is black enough. And these arbitrary standards of blackness hurt us. On Yvette Carnell's channel, she admits and talks about the fact that Malcolm X is Grenadian. He has Grenadian lineage. That Shirley Chisholm was also a Caribbean American who's descended from, I believe, Guyana. So two Americans who play such a major role in the freedom struggle are ones that Yvette Carnell has admitted are part of an American fabric of black resistance that she now also seeks to divorce from black resistance that comes from other countries. So, for instance, she said that Pan-Africanism is dead. Pan-Africanism is all through American history, and people from different parts of the global black diaspora have constantly participated and stoked the American freedom struggle here. I'll give you an example. In the early 20th century, there was a case called the Scottsboro trial, where 9 black teenagers were accused of raping a white woman who may have been a sex worker. And Cuban nationals, black Cuban nationals, as well as Latino Cuban nationals, rallied for the rights and the legal support of the Scottsboro boys. So the black diaspora has always rallied in that way. And to say that it hasn't is historically inaccurate, and it also keys in on divisions for personal gain. And what Yvette Carnell does is she stokes propaganda like that. She talks about a division between black Americans and black immigrants in order to get people riled up about what they feel that they have lost. And that is something that creates a loyal and a cult following, but is also completely against fact and reality of history. Another historical example is a man named, hold on, let me pull it up to make sure I get his name correct. So a man named Ferdinand Smith, who's a Jamaican, who started the National Maritime Union, was a labor organizer from Jamaica, but who was in the United States organizing all black people for labor rights, for fair wages. He's one example. Amy Ashwood Garvey, who is Marcus Garvey's wife, carried on the freedom struggle in the United States to make sure that black laborers who were imported from the Caribbean and diaspora to do American labor got equal wages and equal pay, but also took up arms with other laborers who were Americans to make sure that these companies who created a false scarcity. So the companies who were importing seasonal labor from the Caribbean, they created a false sense of scarcity so they could bring in cheaper workers. And that kind of imperialist action, when America influences the economy of other countries, that's why immigration patterns happen. It's not that people are coming into this country, especially not black people, to take opportunities from other black people, even if that's how it's phrased. Those people have been preyed upon by American empire, by the American marketplace. And they are not responsible for how America tries to cheapen and devalue them and bring them as labor. That's part of the American system. That's why chattel slavery was one of the biggest drivers of wealth. America is the one who innovated the kind of chattel slavery that happened here, where thousands of people were brought across seas to contribute to several agricultural and other industries. That was unheard of before America existed. And it's important to note that American descendants of slavery are from all parts of the diaspora, right? So that kind of seasonal labor movement that Amy Ashwood Garvey was fighting for the rights of, that was one of many examples when Caribbean and African people from the diaspora were brought to America to do cheap labor and were taken advantage of by the American labor system in the same way black Americans are. And that's why it's important to note that the ways that racism acts upon us are all the same. Barbara and Karen Fields have a book called Racecraft, where they talk about Amadou Diallo's death. Amadou Diallo is an African immigrant in New York City who was shot 41 times by police officers who believed he fit the description of someone who had robbed another person in the Bronx. And Barbara and Karen Fields make a great point, which is that those police officers, those white police officers who shot Amadou Diallo, they didn't have any way to tell where he was from. They scanned him as a black person. And because black people are the underclass in this country, he was killed in a fit of violence. That's an important note about where ADOS goes very wrong in trying to divide the black struggle. The black struggle is specifically tied to appearance. There's no way to be able to tell specifically when one is discriminated against, especially for a job, for housing, with police, that a person is rich and black from another country and with a middle class education, black from here and with a working class background. There's no way to tell when these acts of discrimination visit us in our lives. We are all subject to those acts of discrimination. So even though black American people have a specific justice claim, which is, that's a great term. A justice claim is true. That justice claim isn't apart from how black people from all over the world have contributed to this capitalist racist system. The analogy that people were making to me in the comments of my last video is like, oh, that's like if you got into a car accident and somebody hit your car, if you said that you were entitled to, the damages from another accident down the street. And I was like, no. The reason why that is not an apt analogy is because racism is a system. It's a system of car accidents. It's like the whole freeway was jammed up with intentional accidents, quote unquote. So when Yvette Carnell, for instance, deflects to these ideas about representation and Kamala Harris isn't a valid black candidate because she is not a descendant of slavery, or a descendant of people who were enslaved in this country is what I should say, that also changes the complete one-to-one relationship of the car accident analogy. So if it's a car accident between one party and another party, then why are you bringing up this car accident that happened down the street? Like, what I'm saying is that there's no one-to-one relationship between racism and black people. There's no one-to-one relationship between how discrimination affects all people who've been marginalized by the system, especially those with black skin. So the other thing I want to bring up here and that Yvette Carnell is very apt and canny to do, is the fact that Pan-Africanism is such a huge part of this country. Pan-Africanism, internationalism, whatever you want to call it. But a united freedom struggle is a huge part of how this country has advanced the causes of black people. When I was doing research, I looked up a publication called The Negro Worker, which I'm going to quote here, and another paper from Robin D.G. Kelly, which talks about the difficulties that black labor unions have had uniting across cultural lines. And actually, one of the biggest ways that cultural rifts have hurt labor unions is that white labor leaders sought to divide brown people, black people within different groups like Caribbean black people and black Americans in order to diffuse their labor power. So that's happened multiple times in history. And that's the same thing, again, that Yvette Carnell is doing. She's seeking to divide movements and struggles that have already continuously unified. And the only thing that's tried to divide them otherwise is white supremacy and white racism. And there's a brilliant quote from Robin D.G. Kelly that I'm going to drop in here where the paper talks about specifically how white racism wanted to create a political lobby in the labor movement in the United States. And they knew that by dividing black and brown people, they could corner the labor lobby. And that's effectively what they did throughout the 1960s. And then The Negro Worker is another paper that I found, which is a Marxist publication from the early 20th century, also said that black folks in the bourgeois or elite class in America were dividing labor interests. So they were dividing along class lines. This is so common. And I'm sorry, I have so much sorrow that our unity movements break down and that they are disrupted by these forces like the FBI or the AFL-CIO. That's true that it's been traumatic and hurtful to black freedom movements that we've been disrupted and interrupted along cultural lines. But that does not mean that we have never unified. And in fact, what it does mean is that white supremacy and racism has a vested interest in us being divided. So anyone who is pushing an idea of division and xenophobia, and that's what Yvette Carnell is doing, make no mistake, by being on the board of something like Progressives for Immigration Reform, by stoking up social media topics about representation of black diaspora actors in movies, those are division tactics. And that's essentially what an op would do. Even if you're not an op, you're acting in that way. And her movement is just a fancy GoFundMe for her personal enrichment. And the same goes for Antonio Moore. The other thing Yvette Carnell does that is hurtful to freedom movements is she tries to corner the brand of enslaved Americans who are descendants of Africans. So Nicole Hannah-Jones put out something called the 1619 Project. And it was a beautiful literary exploration and historical exploration of the history, both triumph and tragedy, of black people in the United States. And Yvette Carnell tweeted that Nicole Hannah-Jones had stolen her idea and that she was building up this project off the backs of the ADOS movement. Yvette Carnell didn't do that research. Yvette Carnell didn't gather those authors and historians to create a book-length story and representation of African American history. She didn't do that. And it makes me wonder, is ADOS a concept, an idea that we're trying to get into the cultural zeitgeist, or is it a brand? Is it the Yvette Carnell brand that she gets to decide? Because Nicole Hannah-Jones is from Mississippi. She's an American descendant of enslaved African people who put together a historical record that was based on her experiences. And Yvette Carnell went after her as if she owns the right to that story. She doesn't own that. And she was drumming up her rabid followers, Yvette Carnell was, to go after Nicole Hannah-Jones. And that's a common thing that she does, which is to go after people on the left specifically, and a lot of black people. Why does Yvette Carnell have a video on her channel saying that Donald Trump was right? Black people have nothing to lose. Donald Trump tried to get the Central Park Five, a group of, the exonerated five, I should say, a group of black teens in the 80s who were falsely accused of rape, much like the Scottsboro Boys. He tried to get them imprisoned. He took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, and Yvette Carnell, in a video that she eventually erased the video where she had a MAGA hat on, but this video is still on her channel, and it says Donald Trump was right. What is Donald Trump right about? Why do we need to listen to Donald Trump? What does it say that in the year after Donald Trump was elected, Yvette Carnell is using his name to stoke fear and division and hatred and misinformation about black people? Donald Trump is not right. Other than a few things he may say because he's a broken clock that could be right twice a day, he has never had the interests of black people in mind. He's always wanted to kill black people, to demean black people, to put them in the lower class. He's discriminated against black people in his real estate business and said racist quotes. Yvette Carnell would rather be in league with racists like John Tanton of Progressives for Immigration Reform, like Donald Trump, who built his movement on racism. She would rather be in league with that than question it and challenge it. But she will challenge the left. She will challenge black folks on the left. And again, keep that same energy. Keep that same energy for conservative racist movements like Stephen Miller's anti-immigration movement. I don't hear Yvette Carnell talking about that. Instead, she's in league with things like PFIR, which is racist. That's fishy, that's suspicious, and you act as if you are an operative of division. The ADOS justice claim is African. How can you build a justice claim on the idea that you are descended from Africans, but also divorce yourself from a connection to Africa? She said Pan-Africanism is dead. She said, I would need proof of concept when I asked her why we don't fight together and get in league. I would need proof of concept when African people from all over the world have been fighting together for freedom since Africa was divided up in the early 16 nations. Since then, African people have been fighting together. We haven't always been successful, but we've been fighting together. A social media movement based on an easily traceable hashtag in the midst of plenty of Russian interference and distortion campaigns. That's what Yvette rose during. That is only one very small sliver of African and black resistance all over the world. And Yvette Carnell chooses to ignore that and, in fact, chooses to rewrite history by saying that we don't have African lineage, or our African lineage, which is part of this justice claim, should also not be connected to Africa? How'd that work? It doesn't make any sense. But ADOS, the other major premise that makes no sense about how this justice claim can be advanced is that America is a racist state. So appealing to a racist state to pay for the price of its racism has already shown bad results. The indigenous people of the United States have laid out a justice claim before, and they were widely exterminated by white supremacy, widely mistreated, and had funds maldistributed. They were the original raw deal that white Americans and white colonialists brought to this land. And they have not been compensated. So why does ADOS want to appeal to a racist state? It's not a lobby that can create a demand within the political system, because ADOS is very conveniently not trackable as a 501c3 nonprofit, not trackable as a political party. They are a lineage group. And because that lineage is not trackable, They don't have to provide receipts of progress. They don't have to advance policy within the government, even though what they're saying is they want to get these reparations from the government. So again, how that work, bro? I don't understand how that can happen if you're not involved in the political system in any deep or embedded way. You have multiple critiques of the political system, but only on one side, and not on the side specifically that has created a lot of racist institutions like the right. How is it going to advance this justice claim without some involvement in the political system and without some leveraging of the racist state to create this? And there are tons of problems with that. In fact, the U.S. Census has always undercounted and therefore discounted black people. So that's another huge reason why appealing to the state along census lines or along ancestry lines is faulty. But I want to end this with a quote from Stokely Carmichael, because he was part of a Black Power conference in 1969 in Montreal, where Black freedom resistors, and I'm gonna pull it up right now, Black freedom resistors from all over the world were convening. And just like in Bermuda in 1968, Black freedom strugglers convened and the UK tracked them and followed them. I'll drop that link in the comments or in the video of the UK's files on Black freedom movements. In Montreal, Stokely Carmichael and others were actually doing a Black Power conference to bring together global international issues and to fight white supremacy, capitalism, imperialism on a united front. And he said this: "What is the history of the African? In Brazil, 50% of the population is African. All over northern sections of South America, Africans. We don't even know where we are. We have never asked to be sent there. In each of these countries, we do not own or control anything. In each of these countries, we're at the bottom. In each of these countries, at this time, we're not strong enough to seize power. And in each of these countries, at this time, it is the white people who keep running and deciding while we are left on the bottom as puppets. In each of these countries, we've got to understand the roots of racism. Got to understand that. Then we have to state clearly what our fight is. Our fight is against racism and capitalism, and certainly imperialism, which is the highest stage of capitalism. I do not think any of us sitting on this platform are deluded by the Black Power pimps in the United States. If they were not there, we would not be doing a good job. The fact that they have to try and co-opt Black Power means that we are doing our job. It means that we are doing our job. And if we follow correctly, it means that we are heading for the right struggle, because that is precisely what they're supposed to do, try and co-opt it. Then when co-option fails, then the real confrontation will begin to take place. And we have to know that in our minds, if we say that, we are revolutionary. Yvette Carnell and others like Antonio Moore are trying to co-opt the Black Power and Black struggle movement. They won't be successful in doing so if we hit them with all the facts.